Jennifer, did you want to just make your announcement?
Yeah. So just real quick, I forgot to mention, I know we have a lot of superintendents switching around this summer. So I will be sending out a new e-signature form if you're getting a new superintendent. And that superintendent's signature's on either AP, payroll, or purchase orders. Because we would need to get a new signature and encrypt it for you before July 1. So I'll get those out to you today.
Thank you. I think a lot of you probably know the gentleman here to my right. Since I've been here, he's been a huge help. I consider him the man who knows all about transportation. So, whenever anyone has a question, I immediately just tell them to call Dan. So, Dan was kind enough to come and join us today. He's got a little presentation, but what he'd really hoped for is that if you guys had questions in regard to transportation issues or things like that, that you brought those today as well. So, I'll turn the floor over to Dan and let you fire away. Thanks again for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for inviting me. I always like coming up here. I work, again, my name is Dan Payne. I think I've talked to most of you on the phone, but it's been a couple of years since I've been here to your business managers meeting. It was pre-Dave, I think was the last invitation.
PD?
So, PD. So I'm the Regional Transportation Coordinator for Region 4, which encompasses, I have the most beautiful office in the state because I work with ESD105, ESD123 in Tri-Cities, and all of ESD171. So I get to cover the whole center part of the state. So you can be jealous about the fact that that's my view every day. Well, except for my cubicle at ESD105, and that's not so cool. But, so I tried to put together a really fun and riveting presentation for you today. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because when I started looking at the subject matter, there's just really not a lot of fun and riveting material in transportation. But I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. I stole a little bit of my boss's PowerPoint from WASBO. So if you attended Alan Jones' workshop at WASBO, this will be a little bit of repeat. But really, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly because I think what's more valuable for you and for me is just whatever questions or issues you have that we might be able to work on. And I learned as much from you as anything, so anything that you've got, I'm happy to open the floor to anything transportation related. But let me zip through this really quickly and just talk to you where we are. We're going to talk about where we're at right now. Talk about STARS funding, the Student Transportation Allocation and Reporting System. You've probably all had a chance to get your fingers into that and get your hands dirty with it. We'll talk about what we've learned. As with any new system, especially an allocation system, you know, things don't always go quite as we planned them to go. So we've learned some things over the last 4 years. We're actually trying to take that information and do something with it, not just learn it, but what can we do to fix it. And then we'll talk a little bit about efficiency and key performance indicators, because for some districts that is an issue right now, and we'll talk about what we're doing there and what we're learning. So thanks to STARS and the legislature, we're sending out a chunk more money now than we had in the past. Prior to STARS, the median level of funding in the state was about 61% compared to total expenditures. And with STARS, we're up this year to about 98%. So does that mean districts are fully funded? No. Does that mean all districts are fully funded? No. But it means that a much larger chunk of districts are getting their expenditures covered. So this year, in 15-16, we sent out about $420 million in transportation allocation. So we're pretty happy about that, that districts are getting more of their costs covered, and you're relying on less local levy money to cover those costs. So just to put that in terms of a graphic, in 2012-13, this is what the state looked like for transportation funding. Red is less than 75%, green is 95% or higher. And a quick change to 2014-15, which is the first year that STARS was fully implemented and fully funded by the legislature. Things look a whole bunch different now. ESD 171, actually, if you look at this, is treated fairly well. STARS is working for most of your districts. And 2015-16, it gets a little bit better, but we still have some issues, obviously. There's still a lot of yellow districts and some districts that are still less than 75% funded. So we've got to figure out how to do something about that. This is just a different view of 2015-16. The previous view, green is 95% funded and up, and that's just the percentage that we've used to do year-to-year comparisons. But in 15-16, the median level of funding is 98.7%. So this throws the green into that percentage, just to give you a little bit different view. And we'll talk more about why that median level of funding is important in a few minutes. Some of you already know how important the median level of funding is, but we'll talk about it more. So what are the things we've learned? Well, we've learned that predictability is a problem, and I bet you've learned that predictability is a problem too when you're trying to build your budgets. And probably as important, if not more painful than that, is the legislature has learned that predictability is a problem. They like predictable numbers. They like to build the state budget on predictable numbers, and we've totally blown that out of the water. So they're a little cranky about that, but we'll work through it. We've also learned that differences in service models, differences in approach to the way districts are providing service have a significant impact, and we're learning what those variables are to try and figure out how to address that. And we've also learned that we need to make some formula adjustments to make it even more equitable. One of the reasons we implemented STARS was equitability. I'm not even sure that's a word, but I'll make it up. Equity among districts for funding was a problem. And it still is. We've got some work to do in that area, and we'll get there. So what's happening right now with all this information we're learning? OSPI convened a STARS work group, and we have business managers, we have superintendents, we have transportation staff, we have OSPI fiscal and policy staff. And what that group is doing right now, this year, is looking at these issues to try and figure out how to develop solutions to some of these issues that OSPI can move forward in 2017 in their legislative package. Almost all of the provisions of STARS are in our CW, so to correct some of those deficiencies, we'll need legislative support and legislative change to make that happen. So that group right now is working, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what they've come up with for some of the proposed solutions, and then we'll see where those go in the fall. So to talk about predictability, but before we do that, so that you get an understanding of how predictability isn't there, we'll talk a little bit about the 1026A. Has anybody spent much time looking at this document other than the bottom line? You're probably most interested in the bottom line, which I can understand that. So in the top portion, the system uses regression analysis, and it uses all of the district characteristics as data inputs to that system, and it's considered an expected cost model. So what it does, takes the inputs, uses a regression analysis statistical system, and creates an expected allocation. And that's telling you what the system thinks based on all of the things that go into it. The system thinks it should cost you a specific amount of money. I think I picked on, we picked on Edmonds today, so that's not going to be very comparative. The second step are alternate funding system adjustments. We've got 3 different types of districts who fall under the alternate funding system. What we've learned is that if you're a low ridership district, if you are a transportation cooperative, or if you're an ESD providing transportation, like ESD112 or ESD121 that have Head Start or specialized transportation systems, STARS just doesn't work. It doesn't take low student counts and large land areas and calculate very well. So we have an alternate funding system that provides some additional funding to make sure that those operations get the money that they need to work. And that's the second piece of it is that. The third piece of it is the determination of lesser of. So the way that the system works is you get the lesser of the expected allocation that comes out of the regression analysis, or your previous year's expenditures, including federal restricted indirects. Whichever of those numbers is less is what comes out in the bottom line. And then, of course, we add any legislative salary and benefit adjustments that the legislature passes through, and those are added after the lesser of calculation for obvious reasons. And then you get to a bottom line. So what creates the problem with predictability? Every year, the system takes statewide data, statewide expenditure data, student count data, and establishes coefficients for each of those data points. What we're learning is that those coefficients are extremely difficult to predict. We're 4 years in, and we're not seeing steady trends in those yet. If you look at this slide, the spark lines are all over the place, which indicates obviously the problem we're having is trying to create some predictability for you in building your budget and the state in building the state budget. So to try and address that, what we're looking at right now is basically a 2-year look back. We would go back 2 years and look at statewide data, establish coefficients, and then use inflators. So you use the inflators that OSP already uses and add those to create an allocation. What that would create for you is the ability to estimate your allocation when you're in your budget process in March, April, May. And the only thing that would adjust that allocation are any changes in ridership. So you would make estimates that would change in changes to your service or your ridership level, and that's the only thing that would make those things move around. I didn't really explain that very well, but I think you got it. Yeah, he worded it better. The allocation forecast would be as good as the district estimated change in ridership. That would require the legislature to take action, because again, that is in RCW the way that system is set up, so we need to fix that. Just to give you an idea of the inequities that we're trying to address, we're gonna look at 2 school districts and their approach to services. They're both West Side districts, but these 2 particular districts really show clearly what one of the issues are. So we're going to look at Edmonds and Evergreen School District. Edmonds does all of their own transportation. They don't use any outside contractors. They don't use any other outside services. They run all of their own buses, all of their own drivers. Not sure where they find all of those drivers, but they seem to manage, because I know the rest of us aren't finding them. As opposed to Evergreen, who uses the ESD105 Specialized Transportation Co-op for all of their out-of-district special needs and homeless transportation, which in that area is huge. That's a tremendous amount of work. So 2 completely different approaches to providing service. If you look at Edmonds, which is highlighted, their cost per student, $1,320. And if you look at Evergreen, which is about the 5th or 6th one down, their cost per student, $992. So what that indicates to us is, at first blush, is the way that Evergreen is doing the work is a little more efficient. Their cost per student is considerably lower than Edmonds, and for that matter, considerably lower than most of the cohorts on this list. However, if you look at the stats for each of those districts, Edmonds at 13,000 riders, providing service to 63 destinations, and getting $10.5 million in their allocation. Evergreen transporting 8,000 more kids than Edmonds. They're only serving 35 destinations because they're not doing that out-of-district transportation. They're using ESD112 to provide that. And yet, with 8,000 more kids, they're getting $2 million less. That's a problem. We have to figure out how to fix that. And what we've learned is that the number of destinations being served has a much more significant impact on the funding allocation than what we expected. So I know Kim and I talked, I don't know if I've talked to anybody else in this ESD, about making sure that we're maximizing the destination count for districts that are serving multiple destinations. And for some of you, what that even means is where you've got a K-12 site like Mansfield does, if each of those grade levels has its own building number, we're assigning individual destinations to each building number. So we're kind of playing the system, but we're playing it in a way that's beneficial to some districts and a way that's legal. So we're making it work. But that's the kind of thing we're looking at, and the kind of inequity that we're trying to solve. Okay, yeah.
So if you have a K-12 building, 2 wings, and they have 7 different addresses, could you count those as 2 destinations?
If they have 2 OSPI building numbers, yes.
Okay.
So the determination is whether or not they have different building numbers assigned by SPI.
And I believe they do.
In that case, yes. Before you go to the work of doing that, call me and let's look at your allocation and see if it makes sense for you to go through that extra work.
Okay.
Because in some districts, I have an Excel simulator. In some districts, you plug in those additional destinations and you're still fully funded. It doesn't make any difference to your allocation.
Okay.
In other districts, it makes a significant difference. So there is some extra work involved in the process of reporting when you've got multiple destinations. So I don't want you to go to that extra work and then find out it's only going to generate $16.37.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're learning how different service mode approaches affect the system, and we'll continue to learn from that. Another conversation at the table with the STARS work group is indirects. I'll start off by saying we're only going to talk about federal restricted recovery. We're not going to talk about state recovery, sorry. I'd love to see us move to a state recovery model instead. I think it's more accurate and makes more sense, but what I think doesn't matter as much as what everybody else at OSPI thinks. So we're going to talk about just federal restricted. And basically, the federal restricted rate for your district is added to your expenditures prior to the lesser of step. So our suggestion is to change that and do the federal restricted addition after the lesser of step. And what that would result in is every district would get their federal restricted indirects. No question. It would happen after the comparison happened. So you would get, if you're a district that's already fully funded, you would get your direct expenditures covered at 100%, and then you would get your federal restricted rate on top of that, which is kind of, I mean, I'm not a business manager, but that's kind of the intent of indirects, right? Mm-hmm. Just check in, wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. But that's the intent. So again, that's another one that would require legislative approval, but it would pump out about $10.5 million. So it would be a significant bump to some of those districts that were in the red and the yellow on that map. And then the last thing that work group is talking about is some sort of an allocation adjustment process. We don't do a lot of safety net work on this side of the state that I've noticed, but it would be a safety net type of a process. We don't want to call it safety net because safety net is life of its own. We'll call it something else, but it would be some sort of an adjustment process where a district, through providing data, could apply for, through some sort of a process, apply for additional funds if you're one of those districts in the red and yellow. And that would be a way to address some of that systemic underfunding, where the system just doesn't work for everybody. Okay. So I told you I was going to go through that really fast, but before we talk about efficiency, do you have any questions or any specific things you want to talk about related to funding and STARS? You're making this entirely too easy. I do like being the last presenter before lunch because nobody leaves. All right. So I'll keep you posted. I meet with your transportation folks once a month through the school year. I meet with the ESD171 core group here in Wenatchee, and then I also go to OMAC once a month and try and get as many of those north folks together as I can. And this is the kind of updated information I share with them every month. So as the STARS work group moves forward, as we start to get solid legislative package proposals, I'll be sharing that with them. And I'm also happy to come back after we know more about what that package will look like and share more with you as well. All right, so let's talk about efficiency for a few minutes, which is always a fun and exciting topic. When the legislature provided us all of this additional money, which, I mean, I think now we're up to about $160 million additional dollars compared to what we were sending out, they certainly didn't give us that blank check with no strings attached. They required that OSPI develop a comparative efficiency rating system to ensure the efficient use of state resources. So that's what we have. We have a comparative efficiency system. It uses all of the same data inputs as the funding system. It uses square miles and road miles per square miles and student density, your student counts, all of those same things that we use as district characteristics for funding, we also use in the efficiency system. It uses a different statistical process. It's called data envelopment analysis, and that's as much as I know about it because I didn't do well in statistics in college, so I have no desire to really learn a lot more about it. But it does use a different process, and the reason I mention that is because when you look at your efficiency report and compare it against your funding report, your 1026A funding report could show that you've got an expected allocation of far more than what you're spending, which in one hand could tell you I'm working pretty efficiently because the system says it should cost me 10 million and it's actually only costing me 8. That is a measure of efficiency because it uses, because of the statistical system says should cost you 10, you're only spending 8. That's a good thing. And then you could look at your efficiency report for the exact same district for the same year and you could be 65% efficient. So they are two completely different statistical processes. They won't match up when you compare the two. In some districts they make sense, in other districts they don't. So I throw that in there just so that you have that understanding. If you're a district with a resulting efficiency rating of less than 90%, that triggers a regional coordinator review. Not a big deal. All that really means is that I'll come out and meet with you. We'll look at all of the data. We'll look at your expenditure data. We'll look at your key performance indicators and your policies. We'll talk about what are the constraints to you being efficient. And when we do an efficiency review, the definition of efficiency is loading a bus as close to capacity as possible and using that bus as many times as possible. Now, I know I'm talking to rural districts, and that just doesn't happen. If you did that, your kids would be on the bus for 2.5 hours each way. That's a constraint to efficiency. That's what we do. We come in and talk about what are those constraints. Well, those constraints are, I have to travel an hour one way to pick up my first kid, and there's just no way to do better than that. So that's the whole point behind the review. Honestly, because it's mostly those small rural districts that fall under 90%, I can almost write the report from my office because we can look at your data and find out what's happening. But it's always good to meet. We always identify some things that could be done differently. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we have suggestions. Sometimes we look at expenditure data and find how come your debit credit transfers are so far out of whack. There's always something. I mean, we can always find one thing to look at and at least answer some questions. So we identify those constraints. I send you a draft report. There's a place on there for unedited comments by the district, and then we put together a final report, and that goes to OSPI and gets packaged up with the other 75 or 80 reports and goes to the legislature in December. And then the book is closed. There's no connection between efficiency and funding. You can still be, like I said, you could still be 100% funded and only be 65% efficient. That's okay. That's part of the process. So just to give you a quick rundown of the efficiency detail report, everybody is most interested in the everybody is most interested in the bottom line. What's in the bold box at the bottom? Who are we picking on today? We're picking on Kashmir. At least I found a district local. Kashmir is 89% this year. I'll be meeting with them in a couple of weeks, and we'll work through that process. But what the system does is it takes Kashmir's district characteristics or your district characteristics, and it tries to identify cohort school districts, districts that the system considers are similar to you. Using that cohort identification, it uses a weighted average and then creates a target. So you become compared against not any single district, but a target district that's created by the cohort percentages. So in this case, it looks like Kashmir has 6 cohorts that are weighted at these percentages. The highest cohorts are weighted Okasta and Manson with 39 and 36%. And then in the bottom line, it shows the Kashmir target. Once it establishes the target, all it compares is expenditures and number of buses used to provide the work. So it takes Kashmir's actuals and bumps them up against Kashmir's targets, and that's how the percentage, the comparative efficiency percentage is created. There's some issues with this report. One is there's no human interaction. It truly takes all of the mathematical data, runs it through the process, and spits out a mathematical report. It doesn't understand, for example, Lake Chelan. It doesn't understand that, part of the constraint at Lake Chelan is Lake Chelan, and that creates some challenges for Lake Chelan to provide efficient transportation. Part of OMAC's problem is they don't have a nice clean grid road network. They go a long ways one direction to pick up one kid and they come a long ways back. And a lot of you are in that same situation. The system doesn't take all those things into consideration when it creates the comparative efficiency rating. So that's where the human factor comes in when we do our review. The other problem is, and I'll share this with those of you who have looked at your efficiency report, who's 100% efficient? When you looked at your efficiency, Who hasn't even looked at their efficiency report and really doesn't care much about it? Okay. So, if you look at your efficiency report and it says you're 100% efficient, you're not going to have cohorts. You're going to have your data across the top line. All of the cohort spaces will be gone. And then you'll have your target, which is you, and you'll be compared against yourself, and of course you'll be 100% efficient. I just caution you that that doesn't necessarily mean you're 100% efficient. If you look at it and say, woohoo, bonus, I'm 100% efficient, it may not be. What it means is one of two things. One is you really are, you're 100% efficient, and your district is actually being used as a cohort. All of the districts that are listed as Cashmere's cohorts are 100%. Or it means the system couldn't find a cohort for you. You're so unique, by characteristic, you're so unique that the system says, there's nobody like Manson or like, you actually get compared, so I can't use you.
I just think Orondo does.
Yeah, you're right.
I think we're weird.
Yeah.
Different.
So there's nobody like Orondo to compare against, so you default to 100%. So just keep that in mind, which is a perfect segue into the next thing that I'll share with you. We have this efficiency system that's a bit nebulous, a little bit difficult to understand. So what OSPI has done is created a key performance indicator technical assistance paper for every single school district in the state. Regardless of your efficiency rating, we've identified 3 key performance indicators in transportation that make sense, things that you can actually understand. One is basic students per basic bus, basic average load. The second one is special average load, which has limited value when you're not transporting a lot or any special needs students. So we don't really pay a lot of attention to that up here just because in a lot of the smaller districts you're transporting either a very small number or no special needs kids. The third one is cost per student, and that's just a raw cost per student. How many kids divided into your total expenditure cost? You can understand that, that makes sense. So in every district's KPI paper, and these are available online, when I send Dave this PowerPoint, I'll send him the link as well so you'll have access to that. So what we do in that KPI paper is we use a different method of selecting cohorts, again, a method that makes logical sense. We identify the 20 districts that are closest to you in the number of students transported. The 10 up and the 10 down. So the first chart that you'll see in that paper is this one. It shows you who are your 20 district cohorts that are being used for that KPI comparison. And then we compare you against that 20 district cohort using each of those 3 KPIs. So is Cashmere here? Dwight's not here. Okay, good. So I won't be picking on him directly. But so if you look at, for example, the chart furthest to the left, basic riders per basic bus, Cashmere a little bit below the middle of the pack at 42 kids. The second one is special riders per bus, 7.4. Again, limited value in that special needs one. But the third one, and arguably maybe the most important one, probably the best indicator of efficiency, is what's your cost per student. And they're number 6 in cost per student. So we have Cashmere with an efficiency rating of 89%, but they're number 6 out of 21 in cost per student. So when I go in there and talk with them, they'll share some information and we'll talk about their constraints. But one of the things I'm going to put in my report is when comparing against 20 cohort districts, they really are number 6 in cost per student, excuse me, which is a positive indicator of efficiency. So we've created this chart and this comparison for every district, and you can access those on our website. Probably more important than the cohort district comparisons, and I didn't take a screenshot of it, but the other thing that is included in that report is a comparison against yourself over several school years. So we go back to 2012-13 for each of those indicators and show you what the change in your district is from year to year to year. And I think that probably could be more useful to you in evaluating how your own district is doing than looking at some of the comparisons. Because we know that 288 districts are providing transportation, and we know there's 288 different programmatic needs, approaches to service models, physical and geographic characteristics. All those things are different. So district to district comparisons have limited value. Superintendents certainly like to see them. School boards and patrons really like to see them. But when it really comes down to you evaluating your own operation, sometimes comparing yourself against yourself over several years makes more sense. So that information is also available to you in that paper. All right, whole bunch of stuff. I just totally opened my mouth and it all flowed out. So what else? What would you like to talk about?
Are we not paying our drivers enough? So that's why none of us can get drivers? Do we need to be paying them more? Would that do it?
You know, if I had the answer for that question, I would not be where I am today. You know, I think that we see this happen every time the economy improves. When there's more jobs available, we tend to see shortages of drivers, and it's a nationwide problem. We are seeing improvement in the economy. We're seeing unemployment go down. Full-time jobs are available, and that's what people are taking. So does it make sense maybe to do a comparative salary study and make sure that you're competitive with other districts your size or other districts in your area? Maybe. But I don't know that that's going to solve the problem. Some other things that districts are doing, just from talking with supervisors in my region, one of the biggest challenges for new people coming in is that out-of-pocket expense. I mean, it costs about $500 for somebody to walk in the door and become a school bus driver.
I'm paying it.
Okay, and that's why I bring it up, is some districts are, but there's still a lot of districts that aren't.
They'd probably disappear on me if I didn't say I can front this money. you
That's
know.
what.
I'd like you to work for me for a
That's what's
little
happening.
while.
Yeah, yeah, and
After I do it.
districts are using, you know, agreements, 1-year agreements or 2-year agreements. I mean, we know how much value there is in those, but they're trying to retain them. That's the other problem, is you provide them free training to get their CDL Class B. And then a job comes up with waste management and they can go drive garbage truck and not deal with kids and be able to drive it with the same CDL that you train them for. That's a challenge. The other thing, and I'll share this with you because you're business managers and you may or may not be able to affect this. The other thing that we hear is that not only is there that upfront cost, but depending on what day of the month they start working, they might be 2 months from a paycheck, depending on how your district's payroll works. And if you run 15th to the 15th or calendar month or whatever, the potential is they are 2 months or almost 2 months from their first paycheck. Is there a way we can fix that? I don't know. But that's the other thing that we hear is, I can't afford to wait. So, and I'm sharing that just like I said, from feedback from my whole region. Yeah, Dave?
Have you had any, with the labor shortage, because I think this is a problem that's affecting not just the busing, but everywhere
Absolutely.
we look at it in schools, with outsourcing?
Contractors having the same problem. And they
At
pay
least
less.
it's their problem.
Well, it is up until they can't provide the service that you need.
Right.
But, so, what we're hearing is that they're struggling with the same issue, getting drivers. They pay less than school districts typically, so I would think that their problem would be magnified, but I don't know that for a fact. That's speculation on my part. And what we've seen so far, and especially since we've started developing these KPI papers, is from the school district's perspective. If you look at some of the contracting districts compared with their KPI cohorts, they're spending more per student, which seems counterintuitive, but for whatever reason in our state, that's the issue that we're up against. I agree. I mean, it becomes their problem.
Right.
But, liquidated damages only provide a reduction in fees.
Money doesn't get your kids to school.
It doesn't get your football team to their practice or their game or whatever, but.
Have you done, is there any, merging of routes between districts? Are we seeing any of that, consolidating?
I think districts are starting to ask questions about how they could co-op and do some of that work in a cooperative way. I think there's more of that happening than there was before. Districts are definitely looking at how they can share extracurricular services. So I've got to take a middle school baseball team to the neighboring district for a game. How could I bring back their wrestling, baseball, I know different seasons, but you know what how can I bring back their track team? So there's a lot of that going on back and forth. I don't know that there's a lot going on as far as regular routing, but they're certainly sharing extracurricular services wherever they have the opportunity, primarily in small districts. The answer used to be charters. Districts were using more charters for that extracurricular and activity work, but guess what? The charter bus companies can't keep up either. They're facing the same struggles that we are, and that's trying to get drivers who can afford to only work part-time, and that's a challenge. Some of the districts in the Lower Valley and Yakima are packaging positions. I see, you're doing the same thing, so I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Trying to package together bus driver and maintenance positions or custodial positions where they become an 8-hour-a-day position and get benefits and all of those things.
The problem with that though is like for us, for an 8-hour-a-day position, because of the way the routes are.
Yeah.
Employee is actually up in the district for 12 hours a day.
Right.
They're only being paid for 8.
Yep. And
I just go home.
that's a
But
challenge.
they have an hour drive home.
Oh, right.
It doesn't
Yeah,
make
mine
sense.
goes like across the
Yeah.
football field.
Yeah.
When they have an hour drive home, so they're.
Yeah, in some places that won't work.
Yeah.
But that's certainly some of the ideas that people are thinking about. I wish I had a good answer for you. And unfortunately, you know, in the bigger districts, in the Wenatchees or the Yakimas or the Kennewick or Pasco or Richland, you know, they can look at bell times and see if they can figure out how to start adjusting bell times and make multi-tiered routing work and reduce the number of drivers they need to do that work. Most of you can't do that. I mean, you've got buses, you know, Easton is my poster child. They have 2 buses, one runs west to the Summit and one runs east to Thorpe. He can't reduce buses. I mean, it just, and a lot of you are in exactly the same situation where you can't. So I wish I had the silver bullet answer.
We're gonna train the superintendent.
That's what Cleellum did.
Manager,
I think about it.
Yeah. Gary Wargo's the superintendent at Cleellum, and he's an authorized school bus driver. Yeah. I don't think he drives a lot, but
Yeah.
he's got his authorization in case they need it. So, yeah.
I guess the way to do it is take your existing staff and turn them into bus drivers for those emergencies.
And Wapato has made it a requirement that if you go to work in maintenance, you're required to go through the training and get your CDL. Your permanent position is maintenance, but when it hits the fan in the spring, if they need you, that's where you're gonna go. You're gonna go drive a route or drive a sports drop-off or whatever.
and you can do that
Well, yeah, when you hire them, that's.
when you hire them, but what if you have existing?
That's a bargaining unit issue.
Yeah.
You'll have to work with your union on that. Now, in Wapato, bus drivers make more than maintenance staff do, so it wasn't a hard sell. But yeah, it is a problem. You know, there's all kinds of conversation at the federal level about a school bus only CDL that would take away the motivation. Now, it may not find more drivers for you, but it might prevent you from training people and them leaving. Because unfortunately, that is what's happening. I mean, we have people that use school districts as a training ground.
I can't expect anybody to work 4 hours a day with.
Yep.
Who's gonna take that?
Yep.
4 hours split shift.
Exactly.
That's split shift.
And barely any insurance,
Yeah.
if any, you know, so I gotta make it more attractive.
Yeah, if you come up with any really innovative ideas, let me know, because that's what we do at supervisors meetings. I promise that at least half hour of every month's meeting in every ESD, we talk about how to get drivers. We spend a lot of time hashing through what different districts are doing and sharing ideas. And
Have you seen anything really innovative?
you know, the only thing that I've seen that really seemed to help, WorkSource and Workforce got together in Yakima, and WorkSource did a job fair, a transportation job fair. Now, they included all kinds of different transportation providers, so truck and public transit and all those other things, including school buses. So districts could come into this job fair and be an exhibitor and take names and get information. But what made it unique was Workforce then took all of those job applicants and figure out who qualified for startup funds. Because not every district does pay that startup fund. Some of them do it on a reimbursement basis, where they pay you back after 90 days or whatever. So Workforce was able to come in with some money and provide those startup funds, and even somehow, however their magic, and they can use money the way that they can, provided some income for those folks until they got their first paycheck. So Yakima School District realized, I don't know how many people, but they did benefit from that whole process, WorkSource and Workforce getting together. And that's really been the best model that I've seen. Wapato tried to do a lot of different things with combining positions, and that worked to a point, but folks down there have access to a variety of services and found out they could probably make as much not driving a school bus. So they lost a bunch of those people, but
One of the things that we do in Wilson Creek, because we're so rural, is we go out and seek retired people who don't have benefits. And one of the things I tell them, if you spend 5 years driving bus part-time, you can get, your a little bit of benefits paid for. It's a little expensive, but then you also are available to get PEB insurance as a retirement, your Part B, and they like.
I have a really bad experience with some of our retiree people coming and driving our school bus, like hitting a 79-year-old hitting a gas pump when they're calling your track team to Kashmir, so that's not a good thing.
We have some really
Every
good
single one
olders.
of our drivers are
That's
aging
detour,
adults.
but that one detoured me.
It makes me a little nervous when they're.
Yeah.
If
You
we
can have that with the young.
you have to be careful with that.
I know, but he couldn't see. I couldn't tell you.
Right.
I'm counting on the physical.
Yeah, ours passed the physicals.
Firefighters make good substitute bus drivers because they work the schedules that they do. Sometimes you can pick them up. Law enforcement, off-duty law enforcement make good subs because it's just a nice, just a supplemental income for them, and it's usually outside of, they work such odd shifts too that you can sometimes snag them. If you have a golf course in your area, Snoqualmie Valley advertises at the local golf course or golf courses, hangs up those flyers, you just put a little tab off, and advertises that, hey, you need to pay your greens fees, come drive school bus. You can drive school bus in the morning or in the afternoon and play golf in between. And he's actually been pretty successful at that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, he's gotten a chunk of people that way. As a matter of fact, as far as districts, he's probably one of the few in the state that would say, I got enough subs. I don't know if that's where he gets them all, but he certainly has a chunk. There was one other one I was going to share. And then, the flyer on the side of the bus. I came by Pateris, and Pateris has a poster on the side of a bus parked right there at the, in that hotel mini-mart parking lot. Bus drivers needed, training provided. Yakima has 4 of those. They park them all over town every single day. They're out there every day. So that generates at least it generates a lot of phone calls and probably some foot traffic, people asking questions about the job. And if you get one driver out of 10 phone calls, it's worth it. So you might consider that too if you're not already doing it.
So where do you think we're at in self-driving buses? You all laugh, I'm serious.
Not far enough.
This is a serious question, because with all the self-driving cars coming out and everything else, I think the answer to this problem is a bus that doesn't need a driver. So I guess where are we at in the technology? Because I know the cars are getting better and better.
Yeah. Here's the rule of thumb that we use, and it's anecdotal, but school bus technology runs 10 years behind everybody else. And that's part joking, but part true. In that that's about how it works. Technology is definitely
That's just because you let us
evolving.
depreciate them for 10 years.
Pardon me?
That's just because you let us depreciate them for 10 years.
Anti-collision or collision avoidance technology is definitely evolving. That's going to be the next step in school buses. Vehicle and pedestrian collision avoidance, that's coming. Now, how long has that been available in cars? Probably as a standard option, 4 or 5 years. So we're starting to see that. So that kind of gives you a barometer of where school buses are technology-wise. I'm not sure how you get away from the student management piece with a self-driving bus.
Well, then
strap 'em in, strap 'em in.
but then all you need
Yeah.
is a para on the bus, right? Because then all
Yeah.
you don't need someone. All you need is a para. They can jump on the bus in the morning and get their ride into work with the kids. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd make that part of it a lot more seamless. So, but, yeah.
Well, in the meantime, train your parents to drive the bus.
That's what we're gonna have to try.
Yeah, that's what I should probably.
And like I said, that can be a union argument, but, you know, ultimately what it does is gives them more hours, which counts towards their FTE, it maybe improves their benefits. You know, we're sending out more money, so hopefully we're gonna help cover some of those costs that you're having to spend a little more to retain drivers. We're gonna do part of the 2015-16 driver trainer in service. We're doing two things. One is team building for drivers, because one of the problems in retaining drivers is making sure that everybody's on the same team and that you've got an environment in your driver's lounge or driver's room or driver's parking lot or whatever you have, that you've got an environment that's conducive to keeping new drivers in the fold. They don't always just leave for economic reasons. You know, sometimes they leave because they don't feel supported, or they get thick, you know, there's cliques and those kinds of issues. And I mean, they're all over the board. So we're gonna do a lesson plan on that and talk about how drivers themselves play into that, because it's an economic hit for a regular driver too. If there's not a substitute to cover that route today, guess what? You don't get to take that 10-hour trip. So we're going to try and tie all those things together from the driver's perspective and hopefully help with that. And then we're doing a section on driver retention for driver trainers. I'm sorry, driver recruitment for driver trainers. And we're going to be talking about all of these things with trainers as well. And that's hopefully going to be a two-way conversation, and we'll get some innovative ideas statewide. All 600 trainers have to go through that. So we'll hopefully get some more ideas from statewide districts about what they're doing and how they're making it work. And the more information we get, the more we can share. So.
Any more questions for
Anything
Dan? All right. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate
Sure.
it. man.
A little disappointed in you. Nobody asked about seatbelts on buses.
I don't think we want to know.
Perfect. That's good. I like it. I was just surprised. That's almost a textbook question. But we don't need to talk about that if you don't want.
Well, we can if you'd like to. The food's ready. It's about 20 after 11 now. People want to go grab a sandwich. You got until about